I am so honored to be here. I'm Kendra Klein, Staff Scientist for Friends of the Earth, and am especially honored to be introducing this stellar panel. And actually, I'd like to invite you all on the panel up here. Might be a little more efficient if we can just step up to the mic and turn. So we're going to hear from John and Penny and Paul today about agricultural practices for a livable climate that protect and regenerate the land and the ecosystems that we depend on to nourish us. We'll hear from John about the biointensive method, from Penny about permaculture, from Paul about no-till organic. And these are unique, but they are aligned under the principles of agroecology. And so I want to start us off just getting on the same page more or less with what is agroecology. It's a science, a practice, and a social movement. And it's rooted in a fundamentally different logic from the dominant industrial agricultural system that sees farms as factories. Agroecology sees farms as part of living ecological systems. And our role, therefore, is not to dump in chemical inputs on one end and extract products on the other, but to study and learn from ecological relationships. To ask, how does the natural world build healthy soils and systems, and to model our systems on those principles, fostering natural nutrient cycling, biological control of insects, and enhancing biodiversity. In short, to farm with nature rather than against, and to be not master but student. Agroecology has been practiced by communities around the world for millennia and integrates traditional and indigenous knowledge with ecological science. And in recent decades, it's become a unifying framework and a social movement to combat, mitigate, and ultimately heal the damage being wrought by industrial farming systems. So we begin with the soil. As ecological farming pioneer Lady Eve Balfour said, the health of soil, plant, animal, and man is one and indivisible. Agroecology nurtures the soil and therefore nurtures the health of people, communities, and the planet. So we know that business as usual is not an option, and there's widespread expert consensus here that we need to shift to an agroecological paradigm. The science is on our side. These are reports by independent experts published in just the past 8 years. The FAO report pegged environmental damage from industrial agriculture at 3 trillion annually. And it also pointed to organic and agroecological methods as real solutions. We have the solutions already in our hands. I also want to share this graph. I think it's such an elegant, holistic perspective. This is gathering 4 decades of data comparing organic and conventional farming. And what it shows us so clearly is that organic offers this great balance between these 4 criteria for sustainability: production, economy, environment, and well-being. So the question is, if it's so great, why isn't agroecology everywhere? And the briefest answer is follow the money. For a more complex picture, this is from a recent IPES report showing these powerful, interconnected economic, political, and social forces that lock in the industrial food system. And I want to spend a little bit of time on one here, which is the feed the world narratives. This idea that we need chemical-intensive agriculture and genetic engineering in order to feed the world, which remains common sense in the public mind and in so many policy circles. In 2015, Friends of the Earth published a report called Spinning Food, and we detail how agribusiness is spending millions to promote that narrative. With tobacco-style PR campaigns, they're undermining public confidence in organic and ecological farming and securing support from the products from which they reap billions: pesticides, fertilizers, genetic engineering, antibiotics, and growth hormones. This keeps us on the path of business as usual and perversely exacerbates the very conditions of poverty and inequality that underlie hunger around the world. And this year we released a follow-up report, Farming for the Future, which busts 3 common myths underlying that feed the world narrative: that we need to produce more food, that organic is not up to the task, and that large-scale industrial agriculture is the only way. In reality, we know that feeding the world sustainably requires that we protect the ecological basis of food production, and that hunger is not a problem of overall supply, but of a lack of democracy. We know that we need to work towards a more sustainable, fair, just, and democratic world to truly address hunger. Around the world, thousands of small-scale farmers and their allies in the food sovereignty movement are working to bring about just that vision under the banner of agroecology. As the Millennium Declaration states, agroecology is and must be political. It requires us to challenge and transform structures of power in society, to resist economic systems that put profits before life, and return control of the land, water, seed, and commons to the public. There can be no true sustainability without democracy. And so it's not enough to have the know-how and the science on our side. We need all of us, all of you, to engage in public policy, to push for greater investment in agroecology on so many fronts. And I want to end just pointing to this real opportunity that we have in U.S. agriculture. We are 43% of the global demand for organic, and yet less than 1% of our land is in organic production. And so we have this real challenge and imperative ahead of us to meet that demand, to increase domestic organic production, and to do so in a way that protects the integrity of organic and fosters organic production that is aligned with the principles of agroecology. So I'm going to turn it over to our speakers. I want to introduce each of them. First, John Jeavons is an author, educator, agricultural researcher, master farmer, and the executive director of Ecology Action. He's best known for the small-scale, high-yielding, agriculture-intensive method known as Agro-Biointensive, and for the best-selling book, How to Grow More Vegetables and Fruits, Nuts, Berries, and Other Crops Than You Ever Thought Possible on Less Land Than You Can Imagine, now in its 8th edition in 10 languages. John is a graduate of Yale University. He's taught at Stanford and has authored or co-authored or edited more than 200 publications. John has received many prizes and awards for his work, and his methods are successfully used in 151 countries around the world by organizations like UNICEF, Save the Children, and the Peace Corps. Former U.S. Secretary of Agriculture Bob Berglund said of his work, the Jeavons approach would do more to solve the problems of poverty, misery, and hunger than anything else we've done. Penny Livingston-Stark is internationally recognized as a prominent permaculture teacher, designer, and speaker. She holds an MS in Eco-Social Regeneration and a diploma in permaculture design. Penny has taught internationally and worked professionally in land management, regenerative design, and permaculture for 25 years. She co-manages Commonweal Garden, a 17-acre organic and certified salmon-safe farm in Bolinas, and Penny and her husband, James Stark, are working to restore 200 acres of land in Trinity County, California. Penny co-created the Ecological Design program and its curriculum at the San Francisco Institute of Architecture, and she co-founded the West Marin Growers Group, the West Marin Farmers Market, and the Community Land Trust Association of Marin. Paul Kaiser is a leader in ecological, no-till vegetable agriculture. He received a Leadership in Sustainability Award and an International Farmer Rancher Award for his innovative ecological practices at Singing Frogs Farm. Paul first worked in tropical agroforestry to convert degraded lands into economically viable and biologically resilient farmland. And since then, Paul received dual master's degrees in natural resources management and sustainable development. In the last 8 years, Paul has become an outspoken promoter of organic, no-till vegetable production, agroecology, and innovative soil management. So please join me in welcoming our panelists.
Well, welcome. It's just wonderful to be here with you. I want to make sure that I know how to work this for advancing the PowerPoint, so excuse me while I deal with an electronic thing. Okay, good. So I think that my presentation will be a little different because what I'm going to do is I'm going to offer you a personal perspective that is a path to abating climate change entirely. within a 30-year period. And one of the ways in which, in fact, the way in which this can happen is through the use of miniaturizing agriculture through the biologically intensive techniques that have existed for over 4,000 years. A lot of people don't believe that you can do this, but did you know the northern Iranians 10,000 years ago raised all their calories in 3.7 minutes a day? We can teach you how to do that in 5 minutes. It's exciting. And what it means is that we can actually raise our food through localization. One of the most exciting things to me about this is that each of us can do it because we're the solution. So this is, in a way, the hardest solution. Everyone is looking for techniques or ideas, and certainly those are involved. But the change that has to happen is within ourselves. So now I'd like to take you through a PowerPoint, and this is really just an introduction to what's possible. What I need you to know as an overview, though, is there's only 28 years worth of farmable soil left in the world. Every time you eat a pound of food in the world, 6 to 24 pounds of farmable soil are lost, with the largest amount in California. It's amazing. Not much time left, but all of us can participate and make all the difference in the world. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look here, and we're talking about farming for the future now. I want you to know the challenge, and I just told you part of the challenge. I'll tell you the other part. Did you know that organic farming is 50 to 84 to 120% not sustainable? The next time you hear the word sustainability, shivers should go up and down your spine, because it isn't. Ecology Action for the last 44 years has been developing based on Chinese, based on Guatemalan, based on Greek techniques from thousands of years ago, closed loop beyond organic farming. So it's still organic, but we need to we've taken one step in the right direction. Organic is excellent. We need to take 3 more steps in order to close the loop. So, and we're going to have a lot of impetus and encouragement to do so. So I want you to know the challenge. I've just described a little bit about that, and also the hope. I wouldn't tell you any of the things that you're going to hear this morning if I didn't know there was a concrete, easy solution that's being used already by millions of people in the world. This technique, as we've been developing it, is being used by at least 6 million people in 151 countries in virtually all climates and soils where food is grown, successfully used. Secondly, I want you to feel relieved because you see the hope, and I want you to feel empowered. It's fun. We'd be doing this ourselves. It's so much fun because even if there weren't world challenges, we'd do it anyway. You should meet some of our enthusiastic farmer teacher trainers. And what I'd like you to do is act right where you are. Now let's see if I got the electronics down. Nope. Now I do. So it all has to do with creating a new and better world. And it all has to do with what kind of world do you want to create. Remember, I'm talking about you. I'm not talking about technique. It's the motivation within ourselves that's going to make all the difference. If you want to predict the future, create it. We all sit around thinking, well, I wonder what's going to happen. I wonder what think tank is going to come up with the latest idea of what to do. What it has to do is creating it ourselves. This quote is from D. Hock, who created the credit card. Did he create a future for himself? Well, I'm talking about a different kind that's a little more grounded, a little less plastic, but you can do it. And I want you to in-source your solution. The solution is not in government. It's not in academia, though those are both important. It's not in business. It's not in agribusiness. It's in you. In-source your solution. Also, we need to in-source soil fertility, sustainable closed-loose farming, grow your own organic matter, hold your nutrients in the soil, and have a resilient living soil. Living soil is the most important resource in the world. Look at this. Do you realize that in a tablespoonful of soil, you have more living, sentient beings than there are people on this planet? May the force be with you. But because of agriculture, population growth, farming skill base, demineralization of soils, okay, sorry. Let me work it this way. Because of agriculture, population growth, the farming skill base, demineralization of the soils, we're importing most of our organic matter and our minerals. This is one of the reasons organic farming is not sustainable, because 50 to 84% of those are imported. So we have our perfect organic farm, but we're trashing another soil in order to be perfect. We need to find a way to be perfect and be organic and grow soil. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. Organic plus farming is the solution. You're the solution. And look at this. For every pound of food eaten in the United States, 4.7 pounds of soil are lost due to water and wind erosion because of the agricultural practices being used. In developing countries, the second set of jars, for every pound of soil, of every pound of food that's eaten, what we have 12 pounds of farmable soil being lost. In China, 18, California, 24. But with biologically intensive practices properly used, what we can do is we can build up to 20 pounds of farmable soil per pound of food eaten. Now that's something to get excited about. What you want to go into the grocery store and see is not an organic label. You want to see how many pounds of soil were built in growing your organic food. True sustainability. According to a master's thesis at the University of California, Berkeley, Grow Biointensive has the capacity to grow soil 60 times faster than in nature. Wow. What this means is that we can regrow soil that we need to regrow in the world, farmable soil, the 6 inches that's needed for agriculture, in just 50 years, and because of new developments that we found how to accelerate that, to double it in just 25 years. So we better get started, because there's only about 28 years worth of farmable soil left. Closed system, grow our own organic matter, recycle all nutrients, and not only in the crops that we grew the nutrients, but did you know that human waste contains all the nutrients from 1 year for one person, contains all the nutrients that are needed to grow all the food for that person for next year? So if you live in San Francisco and you flush away all your human waste all year for 85 years, and you live for 85 years, if you live in San Francisco, California, thank you, and you live for 85 years, it means that during your lifetime, you will have flushed away 85 people's lifetimes worth of nutrients. This is why the world's soils are demineralized. It's serious. Did you know already we're at peak nutrient in organic and chemical fertilizer form? Do you know that only 1% of the world's farmland is using organic? And if we went up to 10%, that all of the prices of nutrients for organic farming would go up tenfold, and you couldn't afford it if you could find it on the black market. This is real things that we need to think about. So the reason that we have chemical fertilizers and organic fertilizers is we don't have our ship together. Now, in order to do this, you have to properly, safely, and legally, it needs to be a social decision, recycle human waste. So we began in the Stanford Industrial Park in 1972, and we're feeding the world one garden at a time, and that's what we each need to do. It's that simple. What kind of future do you want? The desertification that's up top, or the lush Garden of Eden that's down below? With Grow Biointensive, it's possible to grow a complete, balanced diet on 4,000 square feet or less. The standard U.S. diet currently, takes 101,000 square feet to grow. That's about 2.5 acres. We know how to do it in 1,000 square feet that you can see on the right. This is the miniaturization of agriculture. Now, one problem in the world is there's not enough water. So if you're growing all your food in 1,000 square feet, you use a lot less water. Now, 10,000 years ago, as I told you, Stone Age farmers just spent 20 hours a year annually to grow all their food. In China, in 1911, they were growing all their food on 2,900 square feet. The Hananu in the Philippines, a Stone Age tribe, they know how to grow. They have a 200 crop, 40 staple crop rice varieties, 5-year rotation system that they use, and it's sustainable. And they have no computers and they're illiterate. And they spend 30% of, or more, actually 80% of their table conversation talking about crop growing. Can you imagine? Could you get away with that at your dinner? When all the civilizations around them were fading, the Mayans grew all their food and they survived temporarily using biologically intensive agriculture on a neighborhood scale, localization. One of the reasons that civilization collapsed is they didn't do it closed loop sustainably. Starting this year, the United Nations has projected that in the 10-year period following, coming up when we reach 2025, that 5.5 billion people are likely to starve to death because of not enough water to grow any food or not enough food. That's an average of 0.55 billion people a year. It won't happen this year, but it'll be higher than 0.55 billion people in the 10th year. This is serious. Do you know the Syrian crisis was caused by a climate change drought? And the farmers were dissed by the president of Syria, and they got angry and they decided to kill him. And you know what's happened. So we're in a situation of peak water, peak food, peak nutrient, in organic and chemical fertilizer form. Biologically intensive agriculture uses 33% of the water per pound of food produced if it's vegetables or soft fruits. Grow Biointensive uses 33% of the water per pound of grain produced and 12% the water per pound of vegetable and soft food produced compared with other conventional practices. It uses 94% less energy. But the real energy crisis is in us. It's not in a barrel of oil. It's not in electricity. It's in us. It's in our will. So if you feed your dreams, it's been recorded, there's a book on it called Scarcity, And if you are thinking abundance, you access 80% of your creative powers. But if you think scarcity, I'm scared, you only access about 2% of your creative powers. So no matter how big your challenge is, think abundance. There are realistic solutions, and they're based on universal scientific principles. Why don't you want to grow food everywhere like this? Do you realize if you're growing with big spaces between your rows, that those are really deserts where the organic matter and the fertilizers and the water get lost? We use 50 to 100% less purchased nutrient in growing our food. So in 44 years, we've reached the 151 countries that I mentioned, and millions of garden beds have been created, and billions of pounds of farmable soil have been created. And we're just getting started, and you can be part of it. There are truly economies of small scale. What kind of farm and what kind of way of life do you want to create? Well, here's a biologically intensive mini farm community. And in this, what you can do is you can actually make $70,000 a year in your half-acre plot, and you can grow all the food for a family of 4. So transformation is what it's all about. And I'm over, so I'm stopping. Candide said, the whole world's a garden. What a wonderful place it would be if each one of us just took care of our part of the earth, our garden. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Penny Livingston. I'm going to take this out so I can actually look at the slideshow. Yeah, I want to give a lot of thanks for the words that were said this morning, the blessing that was given, and to acknowledge the indigenous people of these lands who are at the forefront of these huge onslaughts to the earth, and deep gratitude. And may we be good allies, and may we all stand united to confront this and not just leave it up to the peoples whose land this is happening on. So thank you for sharing that. And I also want to thank the mayor and chief of staff and people who are here to see that Richmond's also stepping up to take action for climate change and climate justice. So, yeah, right? Handout for the mayor. So, as many of you know, I kind of am deep-rooted in the art of permaculture design, and a lot of people think it's about, gardening tips and farming tips and that, but it's really about the whole enchilada of human settlements, like economy, culture, land use, ecology, food, medicine, and shelter, all of these things. And so, but it did kind of come out of the idea that conventional agriculture as we know it is one of the most destructive human activities on the planet. And if we don't change how we grow our food, as John was talking about earlier, we're kind of doomed. But the good news is the solutions are here. And what I like about the work that I do is we are rooted in solutions. So we like to think of the farm as a living ecology, basically as an organism, as part of the earth, and that we, as farmers and gardeners and food producers, are part of that. Like, we're also a keystone species within the system. And, really it's how do we integrate, soil, water, animals, and plants. And of course that includes microorganisms, it includes humans. Let's see. So I wanted to take a moment, I know Kendra mentioned this document, But I think it's important, and a lot of people don't really know about it, but once, about 15 years ago, I actually know the family of the man who was the agricultural minister for the World Bank, and he was asking, how do we feed the world? It's like, no, we don't feed the world. We have to get out of the way so the world can feed itself. And it means like stop illegalizing things like raw milk and volunteering on farms and things like that, like allow us to grow our food and kind of stay out of our way in many ways. But the thing about this was that there was about 900 people worked on this document between 2002 and 2009, and it was commissioned by the World Bank, the FAO, the United Nations, and what it turned into to kind of create the nugget is what, after looking at all these different aspects of agriculture throughout the world, including women's issues, including health and nutrition, including ecology, including water, economy, all of these things, what it came down to is what we need is a multifunctional, integrated, regional scale agriculture. And I want to just say this makes a permaculturist have to pinch herself to go, wow, they're actually acknowledging that, because that's what we're calling for, regional scale, multifunctional, integrated, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. So the U.S. Department of Energy even knows that, enhancing the natural processes that remove CO2 from the atmosphere is thought to be the most cost-effective means of reducing atmospheric CO2. And what that is, it's called photosynthesis. So I want to really acknowledge the work of this man, Ratan Lal. He's a highly esteemed soil scientist and was the head of the soil science. Some of you know this man. Well, he did the math. And what he discovered, what he did is he basically calculated how much atmospheric CO2 is in the air, excess CO2 is in the air, and how much that gets converted into organic carbon through the process of photosynthesis and decay. And what he figured out is, now this is really big, and I think this is like the biggest news for me in the last 10 years. Okay, about 8.5% of the earth is arable land, is land that we can do something on. And according to Ratan Lal, is if we can increase the humus content by 1.6%, on that 8.5%, we can bring our CO2 levels down to near industrial levels. Think about this. 1.6%. It's a lot, but it's doable. I mean, there's some people that are bringing up, 5% is basically good, black, organic soil, but some people are bringing their humus content up to 8% and higher. So in some parts of the earth, we might be increasing it by 3%, and other places not at all. But that said, just to give you a sense of what we need to do on a global scale is increase our humus content. So really building soil and building humus is the most important human activity we can be doing, because if we can do this, we could probably turn this around in 10 years, or at least before the topsoil runs out in 28 years or whenever. And one of the ways that we're doing this, and I don't know if we're going to talk about this in the conference, and you can feel free, I can't go into detail here in this time, but grazing and deep-rooted perennial polycultures, prairie lands is one of the answers, because grass puts the CO2, it converts the carbon into its roots. And it goes back into the soil, and over time the roots die back and turns into organic matter, a few meters at a time, if done properly. And so part of the projects that we've been supporting is the Marin Carbon Project with Dr. Wendy Silver from UC Berkeley, who's been doing these tests to see, is there net soil carbon sequestration in grazing? And she's calculated everything from the manure and all this stuff, and feel free to talk to me about details. I can't go into them now because I only have 15 minutes. But a big player here is the soil food web. And if you're using antibiotics in your animals or pesticides in your garden, you're completely annihilating that, which is one of the key, most important parts of this whole process, as many of you already know. Compost teas, and then we have the return of the manure worms, which is key when you have enough organic matter, because as you know, they do incredible benefits. But the one that I'm most enamored with is the dung beetle. The dung beetle, if you actually have, this is around for grazing practices with cows that are not given antibiotics, that if you have a concentration of manure, you can actually, what the dung beetle does, the manure will attract the dung beetle, and you can, the dung beetle will drill holes all over the field, lay its eggs, and then its whole life is rolling dung balls and depositing them 2 or 3 feet down around the field. And then when the eggs hatch, the larvae eat the manure and come up and do this cycle. And I know ranchers who grew up in the conventional way, where there were no dung beetles, and you'd see cow pies all around. You know, they said they used to play frisbee with them. Now they're not there anymore. They're being devoured. So, you know, give a shout out to the mighty dung beetle. Woo! So that's what I mean by integrated. You know, you can't just ignore one piece without affecting the other. So here's a few strategies that I just kind of thought through around what we think about in permaculture. So soil considerations, you know, what type of soil do you have? Oops. What's your mineral content? And if you're down on minerals, like what John was saying, azomite is actually one that I don't like to purchase things. I like to use on-site materials. But if you're working with land that has been mined and damaged through extraction for the last few decades, sometimes you have to replenish your minerals. And there's this place in eastern Nevada where water, the volcanic action, and the sea came together and created this incredible abundance. And it's almost too intense for anything to grow there. The minerals are too strong. But I think of it almost like a skin graft. You know, where if you have, or like probiotics, where you have something and too much of something in one place and you can distribute it out throughout the world where it's needed. You know, azomite is one of those things that I feel like I can sort of justify, but that's if you need, because we do need minerals in our diet. And also how to mitigate erosion, and then of course your fertility management. How do you hold on to the fertility that's there? And we're going to show a couple of techniques, and then you've got your water considerations, because you've got to think about what's your water budget. What's your water budget, and working within your water budget, which a lot of people don't think about. They're just going to kind of impose, oh, I want to grow this and this and this and this, but they're not thinking about, well, how am I going to water it? So one of the things that I've experienced is often we don't have a water shortage, we have a storage shortage. So it's how do we increase the storage on our farm? And increase, like rainwater harvesting is big, and whether it's from runoff or from, you know, roofs into tanks or into ponds, you can store hundreds of millions of gallons in ponds that could then help irrigate your farms. Because these are big issues that are all over the world, especially during droughts, that we have to think about. And then animal considerations, like how do we have animals as land stewards? How can we run animals on the land in a way that they benefit and create more fertility and a healthier ecology with their presence? And it's how they're managed. Like cattle is a good example, you know, mimicking the wild herds. If you want to have pastures and meadows, you got to have grazers. And so how do we do that? How do we let chickens be all that they can be and, you know, be pest managers? And then there's also wildlife is an interesting one, you know, and how do we integrate in a good way with foxes, raccoons, hawks, mountain lions, and gophers. And that's something that, you know, every one of us is coming to terms with in different ways. And then there's also maintenance considerations. What kind of equipment? How do we have access? How do we reduce our dependency on fossil fuels and broadacre agriculture? And I'm looking forward to Paul's talk around no-till, because that's going to be a big solution in this. And then there's also legal issues. Right now, family farming in California is technically illegal. If the name isn't on the deed, they cannot pull a weed in California. And there's been a sting throughout, from San Mateo to Sonoma, Napa County a few years ago. And now you have to be part of an educational university if you want to have any, like a woofer or any kind of volunteer. One of our farmers in Marin, his sister got busted for weeding, and he got fined $1,000 on an urban farm. Yeah, so that's something, there's legal issues we have to address, especially in the state of California. And then there's just market considerations, because how are we going to be creative? And one way is that how can we have high-end, value-added products that can then subsidize food, the more food for the people? And a lot of farmers in Central America are doing that, like say with coffee. Like I noticed Cafe Mom is one of the sponsors. They buy from a cooperative down in Central America, and they're growing coffee, but the coffee is helping the farmers subsidize food for the people. And that's just another strategy that we can use. And also strategically, what isn't being produced? We met a woman in Costa Rica who, she was trying to sell her tamales, and they weren't selling. And I said, well, what isn't being sold at the farmer's market? And she said, well, there's not enough eggs. And, it was a permaculture class in Costa Rica. There was a bunch of U.S. people there, and within 10 minutes we raised $200, and that was enough for her to start a chicken operation, which is still there today, and, think about what isn't there. And then just going through some classic permaculture techniques. One of the things that we use a lot, but you can't do this on broad acre, but you can certainly do it on up to, I've done it up to 3 acres, is the power of sheet mulching, where you can take cardboard or newspapers and put mulch on top, and it basically creates compost in situ around the plant. And this is in Hawaii on Maui, so you can see how underneath that mulch is cardboard and newspapers, but that's it 8 months later. That's a before. You can kind of see that, look in the background, you can see that hollow tree, and then that's it 8 months later, through the power of sheet mulch and creating fertility where it belongs. The power of water harvesting swales, contour ditches, taking that runoff and replenishing the aquifers. We're treating the earth like a biobank, and also eroding. So the power of Klein, I don't know if we're going to talk about that, but how to move water slowly to places where it collects water, to places where the land needs water, and we use what we call Klein plow, which doesn't disturb the top of the soil, and it just opens up the hard pan and the compaction. And then the power of perennial polycultures using biodiversity and, interplanting. So it's actually doable, and that's what I want to share with you today. So for global food security. And Terry Tempest Williams has a quote that I love, and it says, "The eyes of the future are looking back at us, and they are praying for us to see beyond our time." Thank you.
There we go. This is quite wonderful to be up here, and especially with the two of you. You both have been big heroes and inspirations of mine for a very long time. In fact, 15, 18 years ago when I was in Peace Corps in West Africa, I had your book under my pillow every night for probably 2.5 years straight. So I really appreciate the inspiration, and that's a large part from both of you why I get to be here today with my wife, Elizabeth, from Singing Frogs Farm. We're up in Sebastopol in Sonoma County, and we are a vegetable farm. We are fully no-till, but not a mechanized, tractor-based no-till with monocrops. We're talking about small-scale, intensive, hand labor beds where you do not disturb the soil. And we do all direct market production. All of our vegetables go to CSA, farmers markets, restaurants, all within about 15 miles of our farm. So we're really intensive and keeping all our food very local. And I'm also quite amused because this morning's plenary right now that we're finishing up was supposed to be on Agro-Ecology, and the next plenary is on soil solutions, and yet all three of us couldn't help ourselves, and we had to dive into the importance of soil right now, even the Agro-Ecology section, because soil is the basis of life, and it's all we have on this planet. And I'm going to almost rehash what both of them just went over in my own way of doing it. So I do want to hit up real basics again. Soil, and we're talking about the organic matter. That organic matter that's on average 5%. SOM, soil organic matter, half of it's carbon. And that's the carbon that we have lost into the atmosphere as we degrade the organic matter levels in our soil. So historically, according to the EPA and USDA, historically agricultural soils had between 6 and 10% organic matter, soil organic matter, SOM, in our arable lands. And through human intervention and human use and cultivation, we've brought the organic matter levels down to just 1 or 3%. In fact, in California, just last November, the CDFA announced that we are now averaging just 1% soil organic matter in our arable lands in California. It just keeps going down every year, every decade. How lovely. So, nice soil degradation survey map. This is about a 15-year-old map at this point by the UNEP, but the real point here is there's no category for improved soils, and the only non-degraded soils are the places humans don't farm. So it's nice to come across places like the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization and USDA and some of the quotes they have, and I've seen some other beautiful quotes that I've read myself before from the other presenters, but very simply, tillage is one of the major practices that reduces the organic matter level in the soil. It does this in two ways, and I want to just be clear so we all have the same understanding going into this, even though I'm preaching to the choir for sure. But tillage is breaking up your soil aggregates into smaller and smaller particle sizes and releasing nitrogen and carbon out of those aggregates, combining them with the oxygen that's being pushed in like a bellows on a forge or a turbocharger on an engine, and creating carbon dioxide and nitrous oxide, two of the most potent greenhouse gases. And yet, as a farmer, the two things you need most in your soil are nitrogen for plant growth and carbon for soil structure. So the very active tillage is removing your nutrients and creating greenhouse gas emissions. And that's what we've done as that organic matter has gone from 6-10% down to 3%, is we have now globally removed about 65 to 70% of all soil carbon in our arable lands. It's all up there. So, there, just said that one. And of course, Dr. Ratan Lal, also a personal hero of mine, no question about it. In addition, just simple things like every single pass of tillage equipment removes the equivalent of about a 1/4 inch of rainfall from the soil. And we had some friends that were doing organic tillage, and they were thrilled that it only took 8 passes of the tillage equipment to get their fields ready for the season this year. Well, that 8 passes removed 2 inches of rainfall equivalent from their soil, in addition to everything else that it did, in drought-stricken California. That's just not a solution-oriented way of focusing on soil management. And then, of course, you really look at the other part of tillage and soil organisms, which are what the organic matter is composed of. And it's a great quote from the USDA. Tilling the soil is the equivalent of an earthquake, hurricane, tornado, and forest fire occurring simultaneously to the world of soil organisms. Simply stated, tillage is bad for the soil. That's the USDA saying that. The science is out there. They know what's going on. It's really the application of science to economic production models. So as we mentioned, with 2/3 of global planetary soil carbon having been released from the soil and put up in the atmosphere, one of the questions is, well, how do we actually mitigate greenhouse gas emissions? And a large UN and EU study looked at different sectors of the economy, and they found that by far agriculture had not only the greatest capacity to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, but at the cheapest cost. So I don't usually like to put all my eggs in one basket. Diversification is great, but if you had to put all your eggs in one basket, agriculture is one of the best keys to solving climate change problem. And 89% of that potential in agriculture is through better soil management. It's not managing methane and sheep farts and rice paddies and tractor diesel and transportation. It's really about soil, 89% of that potential. So, again, Dr. Ratan Lal, soils of the world must be part of any agenda to address climate change, as well as food and water security. So I also like to look at other studies out there looking at other ways people are trying to bring back soil organic matter. And no question about it, organic has done huge amounts to saving our soil and stopping the deterioration. So we've proven repeatedly through all kinds of testing that conventional tillage continues to degrade soil, no question about it. And the organic tends to stop that degradation and even can begin to bring it back a little bit. But the problem is tillage is what created the degradation in the first place. So using tillage, even if it's organic, can't really solve the problem that tillage created. You've got to think outside that box. And this is why it's proof, because here we've got 23 years, and you get a 1.9 to 2.5% increase in soil organic matter is the best that was out there. And that was a low tillage input organic system, and they got 0.6 percentage point increase over a quarter century. And as Penny Livingston pointed out, we need a 1.6% increase globally. And if we do that through organic tillage, it'll take us a century to do it. If we can go no-till and begin doing things that are biointensive and focusing on soil first and foremost, we can build back organic matter in a matter of years, not centuries or decades. That's the difference. So we're up to about 8 to 11% organic matter in our top layers that used to be only 2.5% organic matter. And they continue to stay strong and healthy like a battery, a supercharged battery of soil. So, our farm. About 3 acres of production on an 8-acre property. My background is really in tropical, our background, my wife, Elizabeth, right here. We met in Peace Corps in West Africa. And our background was in tropical agroforestry, helping to revitalize degraded lands in the tropics. And that really began with ecology and agroecology and agroforestry. So our background was never in farming. We never had worked on a farm. We'd never been trained as farmers. We were really trained in agroecology and ecological restoration. And from there, we ended up with our beautiful Singing Frogs farm, which was quite an endeavor. We've been there 10 years. The first couple of years, we were doing full-on organic tillage, like we thought we were supposed to. And we quickly realized that the act of doing tillage, even organically, was completely counterintuitive to all the agroecological and agroforestry systems that we were putting into our farm. So we realized something had to change. And at that year 2 and year 3, we began figuring out our own system of doing an innovative no-till soil management system. We continued doing some fields in tillage for up to 5 or 6 years, but we've been doing no-till for about 6, 7 years. So we have quite a bit of experience in both worlds on the same property with the same crops. And it's been very interesting to see the changes and differences between the two, for sure. But one thing I definitely want to bring up is there are 3 things that have made our farm the success that it is. And I'll get to some of the success points as we go along here in the last few minutes. But 3 of the main tenets of what makes our farm viable and functional is the agroecology, no question about it. Agroecology has saved our farm, and it has been the way to build it back, to regenerate it and get it even stronger and better than it ever could have been before. Secondly is definitely our focus on soil and being no-till. Absolutely critical, focusing on soil first. And the third tenet is just being intensive. No question about it. If you are intensive and you are focused and you are small, you can get so much out of that space. So much. So, in terms of the no-till and soil management, there are 3 critical aspects that you can always take back to your backyard garden and your farm at the farmer's market and keep these things alive in your head with everybody you talk to, because this is the basics of better soil management, is to disturb the soil as little as possible, keep a diversity of living plants in the ground as often as possible, and keep that soil covered all the time. Those are about how building your soil back. Disturbing the soil as little as possible, we talked about what disturbing it does. Disturbing it is tilling it. Destroys the organisms, releases nutrients. The keep a diversity of living plants in soil, that's photosynthesis. That's taking free sunlight and free atmospheric carbon and creating plant nutrients. Half those nutrients the plant creates, it consumes to grow, and about half those nutrients it creates, it exudes through its roots to feed the soil biology, to feed the soil. So without plants in the ground, you have no food going into your soil to feed the soil. We need to keep constant plants in the ground, and of course, keeping the soil covered and protected. You can cover and protect your soil with mulches, and you can cover and protect your soil with living plants. Both are great. So when you look at tillage, it is the complete antithesis of all 3 of those better soil management practices. So we're doing 3 to 7 sequential crops in any given bed in a 12-month cycle. Some of those crops are actually multi-crop. We'll do mixed croppings together in the same beds. We have high productivity. There's some lettuces and cauliflowers mixed in. And we're all sitting here in a big auditorium in Richmond. I want to get us out in the farm and the fields a little bit too, so I have some pictures to zip through here. I want to share some greenery. Got some nice flower bed ends, lots of diversity in these pictures. And then transplants are one way of being very intensive. Rather than doing seeds and direct seeding, we rely on transplants out in the field so we can get big, strong, healthy plants in the fields. These are 4-week-old broccoli plants in the nursery with some 4-week-old bulb fennel plants behind them. Big and strong and healthy when they go out in the fields. Just like our own children. We don't kick them out the door when they're born or at 5 years of age. We raise them up to get big and strong and ready for the world at age 18 or 22 to head out in the world. So we really got to take care of things. And then those big, strong plants go in the fields and spend less time out in the field because they had spent more time in the nursery, which means greater turnover rate and therefore more economic returns. So getting some beds prepped, transplanting, multi-cropping, watering in some winter squash. Here's tomatoes on the middle. Tomatoes take a while to grow. We have 2 crops of lettuce as we grow on the side of tomatoes, while tomatoes are going from transplant size up to production. So for the 2 months of establishment, we get 2 harvests of lettuce in the meantime. Lettuce is down the leeks. Exclusion, both for frost and for insects. And exclusion is important because I've always liked this cartoon. But sprays are not an answer. Even organic sprays, they don't choose, they don't discriminate between your pest and your beneficial. They don't read name tags. They kill ubiquitously and indiscriminately. So it's really critical to figure out how to manage through agroecology, which is what we've done with many hedgerows. So this hedgerow right in front is a nice perennial, native planted hedgerow of all native shrubs. And we've chosen ones that flower, so there's something flowering every 12 months of the year. So we have constant nectar and pollen resources, as well as habitat for our perennial insects. And that hedgerow there is about 50 plants worth, and we've got about 3,000 Sonoma County native pollinator-friendly perennial plants that we've put in on our farm over the past 10 years. More tender perennial hedgerows next to the fields. I like this hedgerow shot because to the left of this, to the left in that image, 15 feet away, is a 140-acre conventional vineyard. And 40 feet to the right is our beyond organic no-till vegetable fields. So we've got this wonderful little cozy space in between, more non-cropping areas. Because back to the agroecology, back to the native pollinators, back to the insects. I think it's absolutely critical to remember that bees account for 10% of all agricultural productivity on the planet. If we had to replace what bees were doing for us in terms of pollination services, it would cost us 10% more to make that happen. We also have our snakes, our singing frogs, our praying mantids, our lady beetles, our mama turtles out there laying their eggs in the dirt on the edge of the beds, and the baby turtles hatching and walking back to the ponds from the fields. That's a quarter next to that turtle there. That was a real little baby. Pull a quarter out of your pocket. It's pretty amazing. And then it's all about, in the end, the food we produce and the harvests and the people that make the harvests happen and all the food coming in from the fields in this really intensive system of production so that in the end, we're producing almost 8 times what the California state average produces for equivalent small-scale diversified organic vegetable farms. We're producing well over $100,000 in sales per crop acre per year. And so with 3 little acres doing this, we've got about 5 full-time equivalent employees, but it isn't just 5 employees. We've got a whole family of people helping to make this happen. And not one person in that picture works more than a 40-hour work week. We're all 40 hours a week or less, and most of them are definitely part-time. They have full, rich lives. They really want to have just a few days a week on the farm to really get their hands in the dirt and be part of something amazing and growing food and growing community. And the rest of the time they have to do other parts of their life. And it's really been a wonderful, fluxing community of people making our farm happen. We appreciate them very much. They have job security. This is a permanent year-round farm. This is not seasonal. That job security is critical, as well as very good pay, starting pay. So good employment, good security, and that leads you to those 3 legs of sustainability, which is all about environmental, economic, and social. And I just mentioned the job security and the good pay. We have the gross revenue per year, and then we have all the other factors of production and the ecology. I didn't mention things like we used to irrigate 4 to 6 hours of drip per week when we were tillage-based. Now we're drip irrigating about 40 minutes per week, now that we're no-till and organic matter has increased. So we're using about 15% of the water we used to use. Our organic matter levels have gone up by 300 to 400%, etc. So one last little quote from the UN. Agroecology is related to the way you relate to land, to nature, to each other. It is more than just organic production, it is a sustainable livelihood. And that's from their manual, Only Small Farmers and Agroecology Can Feed the World. Thank you.
I'm going to ask our timekeeper, do we have any time before 10:15? No. Oh, I was just checking in with the timekeeper. So we don't have time for Q&A. I do want to let everybody know that this is live streaming right now, and you can check the SoilNotOil Facebook page for that. So if you have friends who cannot be here, let them know that they can be watching from home. So thank you so much, and just another incredible thanks to these absolute leaders and visionaries for sharing their knowledge with us.